Alright, I'm back with another Destiny 2 video, and yesterday we went over the kind of monster twab they did, rolling out a whole bunch of changes to both specific exotics and entire weapon archetypes. We still have ones to talk about for, I think, armor and abilities, but this was a very, very big patch, bigger than I thought it was going to be. Even so, like, you can kind of go through it and pick out some things that you maybe thought would be there that weren't, or some changes that were made that you thought would be different or go further or something like that. So I've assembled a list of things that occurred to me after I read this, and we'll see. It's not everything, it's not comprehensive, because obviously there's like 20 potential exotics that could be buffed in some way, but a few things stood out to me in general, and I'll just go through them one by one here with my little list. We will start with QUEENBREAKER, which, given that Darcy and Whisper of the Worm got such big buffs, QUEENBREAKER remains very, very useless outside of that one time it was very amazing in Gambit invasions for a month and totally ruined that mode. But after the nerfs there, it has no real utility pretty much anywhere. It is one of kind of the most underused exotics or unused exotics for good reason at this point. So if they were going and doing an exotic sniper pass, that was not on the list, I guess, and not that that's ever been a monster like PvE weapon or something, but that would be something I would hope they could kind of figure out ways to modify it to make it more interesting and have more use cases. Also, there's Salvation's Grip. I would consider Salvation's Grip probably the worst exotic in Destiny history, Destiny 1 or Destiny 2. I understand maybe they're being a little cautious with Salvation's Grip back when Stasis was new and they didn't know what a weapon that shot Stasis Glaciers would be like. However, we have come a long way since then, and this patch is buffing Cryosthesia a very large amount to be more useful in terms of its freezes. I don't know if it'll be good. It still doesn't sound as good as Aegir's Scepter at all, but it certainly couldn't get much worse than it was, except much worse is Salvation's Grip. I don't know what to do with this weapon. Maybe you make it special ammo, maybe you make it like no charge time for the largest size of glacier possible and like increase damage against bosses or something, but the current iteration is easily one of the worst weapons the game has ever seen, just because it has pretty much no utility at all. It is at best good for memeing, but not really even good memeing. It is just terrible all around, and now especially when we're getting perks like Headstone, which spawn crystals on headshots from legendary weapons, like, why does this exist? Like, this needs probably a total rework, if I'm being honest, and that might be a larger project than something that was going to get done in this patch when they were focusing on Cryosthesia, but that did obviously jump to mind as like the remaining stasis weapon that is not remotely good at all and is not being touched. In terms of more general buffs, we got a linear fusion buff in PvE once the mods go away, a pellet shotgun buff and a slug nerf, and then a bow buff, again, another 10% to bows for PvE damage against rank and file combatants. I don't know if that's just red bars or red and orange bars. I don't know, whatever. It's still good. What was not addressed at all is pulse rifles in PvE. I think those are not in a good spot at all. Really, none of the models are, unless you are Destiny the Meme and really enjoy your Graviton Lance, but besides that, there are generally, especially in PvE, just there's no good situation for pulse rifles. I think pulses are even like anti-barrier, or not anti-barrier, unstoppable. I think they're unstoppable this time around, but they are just so underpowered against PvE combatants at this point that there's no point using them in anything that's remotely even close to a high level activity. I think also auto rifles are not in the best of spots, maybe not as bad as pulse rifles. I think there are certainly still examples of auto rifles that work well, like a Subsistence Rampage. What's the one from last season? The Splicer one everyone likes, Chroma Rush. Yeah, that one. So some of those are still really solid. I think certain archetypes are still performing decently well, and yet I think exotics still not exotics. I think auto rifles, including the exotics, because no one's exactly using hard light or sweet business very much these days, definitely need, I think, some sort of PvE buff. I think people have really gotten tired of using them as the only anti-barrier thing this season, and that is the only one that has had the mod, which is kind of exhausting, and It's not as bad as pulse rifles, but I think those still need some sort of look, at least a number of their archetypes. I think we got some adjustments last time to whatever the Shadow Price archetype is, but it needs some more work. I don't think we need to go back to the auto rifle PvP meta. That was maybe a bit extreme when Gnawing Hunger was dominating everything. I had fun with it, but I understand why that doesn't need to come back. But PvE, yeah, that needs some help. XENOPHAGE is very bad now and feels terrible to use. Machine guns got their PvE buff, which didn't really do a whole lot, and in the process they nerfed XENOPHAGE to try and like offset the bonuses it would get, but lowering the RPM feels terrible on that gun, and I think that change should be reverted. I don't know about the total damage output, but the RPM thing just it feels like a totally different weapon, and I just hate it now. That used to be one of my favorite guns, and it's always just sad to see one of your favorite weapons nerfed into very irrelevance, like almost instantly, and that's usually what they try to avoid, but I feel like that's what's happened with XENOPHAGE, and I would love to see, it doesn't need to be totally reverted like everything, but the RPM change especially I think needs to go. And in terms of perk buffs, so they buff Adrenaline Junkie, they buff Pulse Monitor. I was hoping they might take a look at one of the new perks that dropped, besides Adrenaline Junkie. Is that new this season? I don't even remember. Maybe Adagio, which is the one that reduces your RPM for higher damage. And I think it was Fallout that did a video on this that just showed that it essentially does nothing. Like damage output is, I think, the same, if not worse. So this just feels like a fundamentally useless perk where the trade-off is not... It's like you're just losing a perk slot, essentially, is what it feels like, and making your gun feel awkward. I think a lot of the other perks they did a pretty good job with. I like Harmony, personally. I think Ensemble has its uses, and I forget what the one is called, where if you get a headshot kill, something happens, or if you get a body kill, something else happens. I don't know. I think that one was okay too. At least you can like feel that. Whereas Adagio, it's just you're not changing anything really. So I think that needs a look. And then finally, I think perhaps the most surprising thing was the lack of a more serious nerf for LORENTZ driver. The only thing they changed with LORENTZ driver was that they either eliminated or reduced the ability energy you get from picking up little charms. This has something to do with what they're doing to ability energy. It might even be this patch, which is also why they nerfed Traveler's Chosen ability energy stuff. But they did not nerf anything else about LORENTZ driver. I swear they said out loud that LORENTZ driver was performing the way Arbalest used to perform, in terms of like the aim assist being way too high for that type of special weapon. And like Arbalest got that nerf, and we all assumed that LORENTZ driver would also get that nerf because it's even worse because of the AoE explosion thing that will just can wipe multiple teammates with headshots. With the Catalyst, you not always even need a headshot. So that was a little odd to see. LORENTZ is not like the most popular weapon. It's not like totally dominating the charts, but it's on them all the time. And it is pretty cheesy, I think, in the grand scheme of PvP right now. So it was just a little weird to not see that touched. Obviously, I could probably keep going with any number of things that are in need of further buffs, but I still think they need to buff machine guns again, for instance. And then there's plenty of exotics that are just not in the meta, could be buffed in some way. They talked about buffing Catalyst to make them more interesting. I'm glad they did something in the Leviathan's Breath Catalyst, which was like increased reserves was the only thing, which was so random. We'll see what the Archer's Tempo buff does, but I'm really hoping maybe they surprise drop a few Catalysts in the mix at this reset, and there's some place to grind them, other than the probably inevitable Gallarhorn Catalyst we'll get from the dungeon. I'm like dying for certain weapons to get catalysts, like Malfeasance, La Monarch. Like a lot of weapons need catalysts, and not just for orb generation. Like that is a important thing, but I don't know. There's a lot of stuff I want to see kind of evolve with a lot of these weapons, and I think they've done a great job with most catalysts recently, and I'd be excited to see them do that for other weapons too. But that has been a slow process, to be sure. Anyway, those are the things that jumped out at me most. I am sure I could come up with a list of like 20, 25 things, but I do think this is a good amount of stuff that they are doing in a mid-season patch for sure. Granted, it's every 3 months instead of a month and a half, but it's a lot of stuff. It's more than I thought we were getting, and it's a good start. I just think these other things are also probably worth looking at in the future, and we will see what comes along with Witch Queen. Or if everything goes out the window now that crafting exists, and that's a whole other can of worms, so we'll see. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I will talk to you guys soon. Take care.